This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network. Presented by Hearthside Bank.
Short and sweet. Who are our 6 favorite all-time Tennessee basketball players? No criteria, just our 6 favorite. That's next.
Go.
Welcome in to Give Him 6. It's our countdown show here on the Sports Source Digital Network. Today, we're counting down our 6 favorite Tennessee basketball players of all time. There's no criteria. It doesn't have to be between this date range and this date range. It doesn't have to be, well, I covered this guy, I knew this guy. Whatever it is what we go with. 6 favorite. Who's choosing? These guys. John Wilkerson, right here from 99.1 The Sports Animal, co-host on this show every single week. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, John. Thank you.
Right over there, longtime writer and columnist for the Knoxville News Sentinel, Mike Strange, and a longtime member, one of the original members of the Sports Source team when we launched back in 2003. Mike Strange, thanks for being a part of the show today.
Glad to be back.
All right. As I said, we are simply going to be counting down your 6 favorite. You can have any criteria you want, and instead of reaching some sort of group decision here, we're each going to do 6, then we'll show our 5th and our 4th, and we'll probably have some crossover, and we'll reveal where we've got crossover. If you like this kind of programming, please be sure, hit like down below it. That lets other Tennessee fans know about this kind of show and this channel, and then hit subscribe. That way you'll know when we put up these new shows up there. All right, I want to get into this thing. Let's just get in, and I'm going to, well, I'll tell you what, let's let the guest start. Who is 6th on your list, Mike Strange? 6th favorite all-time Tennessee basketball player.
Well, let me start by saying I really didn't like ranking these guys. Yeah. And if any of them are watching, it's just random. It's just you could be 2, whatever. But anyway, I was tempted to do just guys I covered because I got to know. Yeah. But I had to throw in a couple of guys that have come along since I've retired. And my list won't include any of the old-time Vols because I grew up in Kentucky, and I promise you, as a boyhood, none of my heroes were wearing orange. So my list starts when I get here in the 80s. And number 6, right off the bat, I'm going to fudge the rules.
Okay.
And you can put me on double secret probation. Number 6 is a combo of Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield because I see them, I can easily group them as one guy, Thunder and Lightning or whatever they were.
Peanut butter and jelly.
Peanut butter and jelly, there you go. I made one exception of doing that.
Well, on our shows, we call that cavaliersing the question.
I'm very familiar with that. I'm cavaliersing the question by going Grant Schofield and Grant
Williams and
Admiral Schofield as one entry. That 2019 team, I'd retired by then, but that was just so much fun to watch. And
two likable
two
guys.
Very likable guys.
It's interesting how Grant Williams got to the pros and kind of became I watched him with the Celtics, and it's like he wanted to become the new Draymond Green. He was kind of a little bit of a Woody Woodpecker on the court, which you didn't see a lot of at UT, or maybe that was just we're covering him. Maybe fans of other schools noticed it more than we did, but when he was on the Celtics, it's like, where did this come from? Because he was just always Mr. Likeable. He was such a unique personality too. He had the upbringing where his interests were so varied, the piano, everything, and then Admiral Schofield, another really good young man.
One guy's born in England, the other guy's recruited by Dartmouth and Cornell and all the Ivy League schools. So interesting combination, and I won't do it again, but this time I've cheated.
I'll allow it. Did you have Grant Williams or Admiral Schofield on your list?
I did not, but certainly you can't help but think about this as an exercise and wind up with them at least coming to mind because both incredible individuals as well as such key contributors to Tennessee. My number 6, I was kind of surprised because he's on the team now, and that's Zakai Zeigler. I just think first of all, how he arrived at Tennessee is remarkable, and you knew that at the time because everything was about Kennedy Chandler, and yet I had a chance to pinch hit for Bob when they went up to Connecticut, and he's out there on the floor as a freshman. So Chandler was a little bit banged up at that point in time, but he gets out there and they played, they played Villanova in North Carolina. And they stomped a mud hole in North Carolina, which was really enjoyable. But anyhow, it's just from that point on, just to look at his approach on the floor, all that he contributes, not just as a point guard, but as a defender and all that. And then I love his personality because he'll be sitting there post-game, and I can't remember who it was that he was sitting next to, and was kind of like, well, I'm 6'10", and he immediately says, I'm 6'10" too. He's not going to let anything that you try and put him in a specific category or an a round peg and a round hole. I just really like everything that he's meant to this team.
All right, so you can go ahead and write Zakai Zeigler down there at 6. You're 6. You can write Williams/Schofield. I'm going to go ahead and put Zeigler at number 4. You mentioned him, so that's where I had him. I had him a little higher, and you nailed most of the reasons. One, I don't know how many more connections you're going to have like this with the current state of college athletics. Even when Rick Barnes signed him, he signed him with the idea that here's someone who will be around. Because you were starting to get to that place where people are leaving early and you're transferring. So we got this guy, and most fans, if you remember it, everybody was like, why is he getting this 3-star guy? He spotted him playing at a tournament and really liked him, and there's a recent story, he's got another kid like this. You can only hope he'll be as good as Zakai Zeigler. But he spotted him, he brings him in, and there was a lot of blowback, from the folks that all want 5 stars. If it's less than a 5-star, he'll never be anything. Zeigler was that kid who became the little engine that could in a lot of ways. The personality you mentioned, also the tie to the fan base, because the tragedy of losing their home in New York, and then the UT fan base giving so much money to help them. That's a bond that I don't think you're going to see many of those going forward in college athletics. And it's a shame because that's what you used to get with all these kids. It used to be you'd watch them grow up. In fact, I'll move on to my number 6, and that's one of those guys. He started, and he had an issue, I believe it was at Vanderbilt, where he kind of took himself out and was flustered, and it didn't look good his first year. He got better his second year. He then got better his third year than his second year. By his senior year, Wayne Chisholm was a fan favorite, a tremendous player.
Wheezy.
I had Wheezy, number 6 on my list, and it's very difficult. You're talking about ranking the guys that are on the list. There's about 10 guys who almost made number 6 or could have been number 1 on my list.
And I hope we'll have a minute to mention a few of those guys because I was in the same situation. Absolutely. It's really hard to.
Well, and that's kind of the fun of these shows. Yes. The idea is just to throw out names and games and coaches that fans out there remember and may not have heard of in a long time. And Wayne Chisholm, to me, was one of those guys that, again, I'm drawn to those kind of stories where guys here for 4 years, gets better every year. You watch them mature and develop not only as a player, but as an individual. And I thought Wayne Chisholm really embodied that, and he was the best of those programs at the time, in my opinion. I really liked Wayne Chisholm. So that was my number 6.
Yeah, he I don't know if he probably still does it, but he did at the time, I think, hold the record for most games played.
Yeah, and it may have changed now because Barnes keeps going so long. I mean, he's going deeper in the tournament now, so you may have. I wonder if Zeigler is passing him. I think Chisholm had all-time wins too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was on the all-time win list. So, but if he's not number 1 still, he's way up there.
You got time for a quick Chisholm-related story?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is let's see, probably about 2000. It was 2011. It was the year Tobias Harris played. Mike Griffith from the New Sun and I would travel to the games, and the Vols played a weeknight game at Ole Miss. And we were staying in Jackson, Tennessee. So game's over late night. We got to drive through the wee hours, 2-lane highway up to Jackson, Tennessee. And we're going through at probably 1 o'clock in the morning, a little town called Bolivar, Tennessee. And I don't know if it was, I'm not saying it was a speed trap, but I'm saying it was a cop out there. And we get pulled over, Griffith's driving for going 15 in a 10 zone or something like that. Roll down the window, policeman comes up, and we explain where we've been and what we're doing. And it was Wayne Chisholm's either cousin or uncle was the policeman. He says, go on, just be careful.
So the whole family's good people. There we go. Wayne Chisholm. Wheezy was my number 6. Zeigler was my number 4. Half my list is going to be gone because we're doing this on the S-curve. So I'll start the number 5 round. And it's crazy that he's so low on my list, but he was there when I was in school, and he was about the only good thing with those teams. His dad was the coach, Allan Houston, one of the all-time greats at Tennessee, but I've got half my list gone already thanks to you two. But Allan Houston, to me, deserved to be on the list. I'd say for many people he could be number 1, he could be number 2. We know what a great player he was. But the thing is, he did it at a time where there were other guys. I don't want to shortchange anybody on the team. But in terms of one guy lifting a team, he was put in that situation where he really had to. The other team knew that we got to stop this guy. We're not going to worry so much about Carlos Groves and Steve Rivers and some of these other cats. It's Allan Houston is the guy we got to stop, and he still couldn't. He was an unbelievable player, and to handle the situation with the losing and his father's the coach, and I just thought he did it with class and grace. He was never a big personality on campus, and I wonder if he had been, would he have had a better connection? Of course, playing on losing teams didn't help. But Allan Houston has to be on that list, in my opinion, of my all-time favorites, just because I was over there at the time and I watched him just put on a one-man clinic night after night after night. You'd go over to Thompson Bowling Arena and know that you could very well lose to a bad team, but you'd get a show out of Allan Houston. So I put him on my list at number 5. Did anyone have? I see you wrote him down.
He's number 3 on my list for the reasons you said. He just had so much class and so much grace, and scored more points than anybody in the history of the SEC except Pete Maravich, 22,801 points. But it was mostly a combination of his classic talent and just his grace. I thought his class.
Grace is a good word.
And he did all. I looked it up. He averaged 15 shots a game. Now that might sound like a lot but for a guy like Allan Houston that ends up, I don't know how many shots Pete Maravich averaged a game. Right. It was a lot more than 15, and a lot of guys did. But that just shows that he wasn't a prima donna. He was all about team. Maybe he should have shot more.
Well, it also shows just how good he was, because you put up that many points on 15 shots a game, you're hitting a lot of those 15 shots. Yeah. He was an unbelievable player. Did you have him on your list or no?
He didn't wind up in my top 6, but he's one of those that were like, how can you leave him off your list? And because he was that good. And again, exactly what you're hitting on. Not only was he the best player that Tennessee had seen in a while, and a generational talent that came to the University of Tennessee, but it was just how he handled everything that was there. Because it's not like he could sit there and say, man, I wish I was playing for this team. Or, he was originally on his way to Louisville, and then he was let out of that. Yeah. And so I just appreciate how he handled that and how he's handled everything since.
I was on a plane once coming back from a game with Don Rutledge, the longtime SEC official, and we got to chatting. And
nice hair, isn't it?
Yeah. He just made the comment that Allan Houston had the sweetest shot he thought he'd ever seen.
He was something. I always think it's interesting whenever I go to Madison Square Garden, which that makes it sound like I'm up there every week, but whenever I'm in Madison Square Garden, you walk around there and you think that all-time 3 of Tennessee's greatest players have all wound up playing for the Knicks up there, including Allan Houston. Yeah. I remember Bruce Pearl, when he took a team up there, and he made that comment, Madison Square Garden, home of so many great Vols or something to that effect, and the media kind of laughed. I don't think they got it. And he's like, no, really?
Yeah.
Bernard King, Ernie Grunfeld, Allan Houston. That was so far from where the program is now. Mm-hmm. But Allan Houston, a tremendous, tremendous player, tremendous volunteer. All right, John, and just to be clear on this is not a list. I tried to make. Wayne Chisholm, I don't think anyone would put him up there in your top 6 talented players all time. Right. This is simply our favorite guy. So if somebody here throws out Tyrone Beeman, no knock on Tyrone Beeman, but I don't think he'll be on anybody's list of the greatest. But if somebody throws out Tyrone Beeman or Steve Ray or Lang Wiseman, it doesn't have to be the All-Americans.
Right.
It can be anybody that we enjoyed watching or covering. All right, John, who is number 5 on your list?
He's still around the university today, and that would be the rim tamer, Steve Hamer. He was such a significant prospect to land at the time, and there was a lot of pressure because he was from the state of Tennessee, and that's where he played his high school ball, and coming on into Knoxville, and of course played for a couple of different coaches, and so it really was a unique point in time. But not only did I appreciate his game and the situation he was in, but I also loved his personality and continue to do so to this day, but also love the fact that he's the first athlete that I saw seemingly almost every time Tennessee took the field at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, he was there. And I appreciate those volunteers that while they're a part of the campus community, that they're at other teams, whether it be the Lady Vols, the Volunteers, you name it, in other sports. So just the fact that he was always, you could see Mr. 7-footer right down there. He liked to stand just a little bit to the third base side of home plate. And then it was also one of the first times where you would just have lines of people that would come up and want to talk to him while he's watching the game. And so again, for everything he did on the floor for Tennessee, and he had a 30-20 game in the SEC tournament against Alabama, which was really enjoyable. But I just loved how he handled himself when he's just there to watch the Vols play baseball, and yet there's this long line of people that are just wanting to talk with Steve.
And it's hard for him to hide.
Yes.
He's not a small guy.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
He was in my honorable mention, wanted to be on my list, and I love seeing the guys I covered go on and turn into grown men and be successful, and and I'm proud of them. Even though I had nothing to do with it, I'm not taking any credit for it, but just I'm so happy to see Steve go on and see who he's become. And you mentioned that game, the Alabama game in the SEC tournament. Alabama had a really good post player named Roy Robinson, and Hamer did the 30-20 on him. And when I see Steve today, I always say, Roy Robinson, wherever he is, in any room to this day, when somebody says the name Steve Hamer, Roy Robinson gets under the bed.
It's a tremendous story. He's now, what do they call it? Is he the head of the VFL program? Mm-hmm. So a remarkable story. He was, as I recall, he was not a guy that really loved doing the media at the time. I may be wrong on that, but to watch him develop, that might have been early on. Back when we were doing our show at WBIR side channel 25 years ago, we tried to get him on there a few times. It was kind of hard to lock him down. I never got the feeling that he really loved doing it. But now you see he's doing media on 99.1. He's doing all network stuff. He does a great job. So
Thursday morning, 7:33, he joins us on Sports Talk.
there you go.
And he was a legit 7-footer. I mean, some guys, they say they're a 7-footer. He was a legit 7-footer. And he was a guy that survived the transition from Wade Houston to Kevin O'Neal, and a lot of guys didn't.
No, that's true. Well, a lot of guys just didn't survive Kevin O'Neal, period.
Right.
So, all right. Who have you got then as your – well, we've got your number 5.
I had Zeigler.
All right,
5.
so we're ready for your number 4.
My number 4 is the Wiz, Tony White. He was, when I came on the beat, he was, maybe a sophomore, junior, and just a guy like Zeigler and like another guy we're going to mention was a afterthought as a recruit. I mean, he was considering going to Pfeiffer College at one point.
Wow.
Tennessee got a hold of him. Tony White comes in here and just developed into just a tremendous player. He wasn't that big. He wasn't that fast, but he was just a wonderful combination of all that. And I think he's the number 3 all-time scorer in Tennessee history, and just such a pleasant guy. He was fun to watch. I thought he had a kind of a joy or look of joy or wonder on his face when, before his senior year, I went over that summer to Charlotte, North Carolina, and visited with him and his Uncle Frank, who was real instrumental, and his mom and his high school coach, and really got to know him a little bit, and just a good guy. He,
it's interesting. There aren't many guys who can say they had a 50-point game, and he went for 50 in his career. He is a guy who we have campaigned on my show for him to have, and the friends of Tony are trying to get his number retired at UT. And UT has, everybody's got to have criteria, and I get it. That makes it easy. You don't have to, hey, I'm sorry you don't get on because we've got the criteria. There are some people where you throw out the criteria. Mm-hmm. Tennessee initially came up with the criteria so they wouldn't have to retire Johnny Major's jersey. Okay, then they realized that's stupid, and they changed the criteria, and Johnny Majors got his jersey retired. It's time to do that with Tony White because he was the best player at the end of Don DeVoe's good years. He was the star there.
He was an SEC Player of the Year on a team that didn't even make the NCAA tournament.
Which is insane. You wouldn't have that today.
Right.
It's remarkable. He did carry the team. You're right. He did have a joyful personality. I remember John Ward, would have a lot of fun with his name, with the electric light Tony White, that kind of stuff. I just think that UT, and I don't know if you can because you're Vol Network, but you and I can sit here and say it. I think that he's a guy who deserves to have the number up in the rafters. Forget your criteria.
Exactly.
He belongs there.
Yes, he does. And I'm like you. To me, it doesn't make one bit of difference what they did or didn't do beyond the walls of the University of Tennessee. When you wore the orange and white, if you were special, retire your number. I mean, I mean incredibly special, and he specifically was.
Yeah. He's another one where you didn't know what you were going to. It was a little like Allan Houston, that the team might not do well, but you know you're going to get a show from Tony White when he was out there.
He liked how Michael Jordan was going to compliment his game when he was drafted by the Vols.
I mean, he had the 51 wasn't a complete. He had 49
That's
in
right.
a game of a month before that.
Yeah, he was a tremendous scorer. And we'll get to the guys that are left off, but he had a teammate who almost made my list who nobody ever talks about. So we'll get into those guys too. All right, so that's your number. So you've got 6, 5, 4, and your 3 are gone already.
I've got 1 and 2 left.
So we're going to zip. This is going to be one of our faster shows. All right, so you're at 6 and 5. Who's your number 4, John?
That would be former Bearden Bulldog, Tennessee point guard Bert Bertelkamp.
Okay.
He went to my high school, and that was the coolest thing ever. He was 1 year in front of my oldest sister, but it was the coolest thing to have somebody who went to Bearden High School that was a Tennessee Volunteer, and it was at the point in time, it was part of the Ernie and Bernie show. Yeah. That's right when I really started to get to go to Tennessee basketball games. So I did love the Ernie and Bernie show, but I also love the fact that it was Bert and Ernie. So Bert Bertelkamp, not only the fact that it was every time he took the floor, it's like that. I just loved what he meant to the team, because when Don DeVoe is the coach, he is a big part of them getting to the NCAA tournament, be a part of that season where they beat Kentucky 3 times. Take that. And at the same time, I just really appreciate everything he's also meant to the University of Tennessee and the basketball program since then, because I've had the chance to call games with Bert and pinch hitting for Bob, and would not have imagined the experience being as enjoyable as it was, because he's just somebody. He's like Tim Priest. Not everything is going to be the greatest of things, whether it's going well or it's not, but I just love his love for the University of Tennessee.
50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's he might have the longest resume of anybody we're going to put on here, to have played to have started in the mid to late 70s, and then to go as your team broadcaster. He took that over in the late 90s, but to do that for another 26, 27 years, whatever he's done it for, and walking away this year, that's a hell of a thing to say, I dedicated 50 years to my alma mater. And I'm sure he would say that the alma mater has taken care of him for 50 years.
He would say, money.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a second. I know we're talking favorite players, but I had this conversation with somebody the other day. Guys of a certain age, remember, bottom.
Yeah.
John Ward with bottom. That was his thing. Bert Bertelkamp made money a new thing.
Yeah.
It replaced bottom in Tennessee, which is hard to believe, but you got to credit somebody for not just ripping off what the last guy did, come up with your own thing. But I never thought in my wildest dreams anybody would come up with a catchphrase that would be as synonymous with UT basketball as bottom was with John Ward. But he has with money.
Yes, he has,
sure. That's something when you leave a legacy of my call will stand, whether it's holy cow or whatever, but to have money.
That's right. And to a lesser degree, talk to me, Felix.
All right, so your number 4 was Bert Bertelkamp. Mine was Zakai Zeigler. All right, so that means we're about halfway through here, which means I want to tell you a little bit about Hearthside Bank. Folks, they bring you the entire Sports Source Digital Network. We're putting up all kinds of content here, battling the algorithm a little, but for those of you who are enjoying it, who are finding the content, we're glad you're enjoying it, and that's thanks to Hearthside Bank. They believe in the local community. That's because they've got, we're talking about, Mike grew up in Kentucky. I spent years in Middlesboro, Kentucky. Hearthside Bank has banks that range from southeast Kentucky all the way down through Farragut here in East Tennessee. They understand the people, they understand the community, they understand your love of sports, and that's why they've been behind us here. Folks, if you're looking to do some personal banking, business banking, mortgages, financial planning, whatever your financial need, start it by getting in touch with Hearthside Bank, hearthsidebank.com. We appreciate them for bringing you shows like this on the Sports Source Digital Network. All right, so I am left to put up my number 3. and I'm guessing I'm the only guy that's going to have this name on the list. But this shows my era, my age, as if the rest of just looking at me doesn't show my age. I was a little bit young for Ernie and Bernie, so I couldn't put them. I remember bits and pieces, but I couldn't put them on this list. My era was that next era. And my number one, you're going to guess by looking at my number two in terms of that era. But I'm going with a guy named Michael Brooks at Tennessee, who averaged 15 points his last year, 12, I think, the year before that. But he shot 51% his last year. He shot 50%. If they had had the three-point shot in his day, his points would have been through the roof. Michael Brooks was a dead-eye shooter outside. I loved him as the outside gunner. He complemented the game of my number one, who won't be mentioned until somebody else throws him out here or I get to number one. But Michael Brooks, probably a name people haven't thought of in a lot of years. One of my all-time favorites as a kid. Loved watching him play, and man, you knew that the ball was going in the net when he got a shot from outside. Thoughts on? Hey, look at that, number two. You've got him higher than me.
That's right.
Well, you can tell we aren't
for the
down to the
exact same
age.
reason. I love the fact that, and I remember talking with Coach DeVoe when he was gracious enough to either be on your show or on with me and Jimmy. It was, well, he was ready to shoot the moment he took that last step off the bus, and he certainly was. And it was just he was as cool as they come. Loved how many times that he came through for Tennessee big time in big games, and then also really enjoyed how he wound up on his free throw because it would come off to the side and then come straight through on the follow.
I mean, he's a great free throw shooter.
Yes, and so just loved his game, and so he is one of my all-time favorites, and unfortunately not blessed with great speed, because I certainly think he had the skill as a shooter to make it in the NBA. He just wasn't fast enough.
Yeah, and again, another one of these guys that if they had played by today's rules with the three-point shot, he would have had a different career because of his ability from outside. Mike, thoughts on Michael Brooks, because you would have covered him.
I think my first year full-time on the beat was his senior year. He had been like injured or something or I don't know if it was academics, or it seemed like he had been a hiatus, and then he came back his senior year and was, I remember, like you said, a guy that was not that athletic, but just a dead-eye shooter, a stone-cold killer.
Yep. Michael Brooks, my number three. All right, so we're getting down to brass tacks here. John Wilkerson, who's your number three as we wind back around?
Well, it's just, if you're talking Tennessee basketball, for me, it's Ernie Grunfeld at number three.
Okay.
And it was just because, and again, very impressionable, because that's my youngest days of fandom actually going to games, but not only was he a Tennessee Vol, but he was an Olympian. And also love the fact, my dad used to comment on just how he used his legs to shoot from the free throw line. So, I mean, it was such a deep knee bend as he went down and came up to shoot. He was also really good. Love the fact that both he and Bernard King were on the cover of Sports Illustrated, which was such a momentous event. I mean, folks have no idea how big that was, except guys that are older, because it was such a big deal. Double trouble in Tennessee. And but anyhow, Ernie Grunfeld was by a nose my favorite player compared to Bernard King between the two. But yeah, Ernie G.
Well, you can cheat like I did and put Grunfeld King together.
Now, don't mess up all my rules. I gave you. Okay, so Ernie Grunfeld.
Ernie Grunfeld. And it was funny, too, because then you watch him go on to the next level, and, of course, he doesn't have the same success there that he had at Tennessee, and you can't help but wonder, why is that? But just to see him work for the different teams that he did, loved it when he wore those wonderful uniforms with the Milwaukee Bucks. Couldn't stand it when he was playing, I think, for the Kansas City Kings, and they had the name on the bottom of their jersey as opposed to below the number as opposed to on top of it. So I remember following Ernie around the league for a bit, and also he would be one of those, as Bruce Pearl said, that played for the Knicks. And it was awesome to watch him compete. I mean, that's where he came from to join the University of Tennessee, was New York.
And had a long NBA career.
Yes.
I mean, he wasn't as storied as Bernard King.
Not really a starter so much, but a long career.
Yeah, long career.
And then as an executive, too.
Yes. Did you have him on your list? He would have been before you came here. Again, would he have been one of the ones that you...
Ernie was a guy, when Ernie played, I was... before I got into journalism, I was just working there in Lexington, Kentucky, and So Ernie was not on my favorite list. And as he, then probably about his junior year, I went into journalism school and it began to change where I'm not a fan now. I'm just, and I'm at some games for the UK University of Kentucky student paper, and I'm watching him, and so I'm appreciating him.
Yeah. All right, so we've got, hold up yours here. Let's hold it up for this camera, your camera there. Let's see, we got Allan Houston. Yeah, we'll go Williams and Schofield. You cheated to make that your 6. Zakai Zeigler was your 5. Tony White was your 4. Allan Houston was your 3. Who's your number 2?
Number 2, I probably, again, this is not going to be on your all's list, and it's a guy I covered. He's, if I said the king of the boom boom room, Ron Slay.
Yeah.
Ron Slay was just such an effervescent, and still is.
Yeah.
I just enjoyed covering him so much. And his freshman year, funny story, his freshman year, they had Midnight Madness. The men and the women combined for a Midnight Madness at midnight at Thompson Bowling Arena. So my introduction to Ron, I knew who he was and I knew what he looked like, but I'd never seen him on a basketball court. So Midnight Madness comes, pretty big crowd, and they have a dunk contest. Ron Slay comes out in a Scream mask, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The hood and does the dunk contest in a Scream mask. And I thought at the time, this guy might one day be the new Meadowlark Lemon of the Harlem Globetrotters. Yeah. And he may have he might have missed a chance there that he could have been, but he was just a really good college player, came back from an ACL, like Tony White, SEC Player of the Year on a team that doesn't even make the tournament, leads the team in scoring. He was just, this is maybe some media bias. He was so media friendly. So,
John, I'll let you go. Did you have, well, you don't have Slay on
No.
the list, but he was very close to making my list. Very close.
Absolutely.
There were basically 3 guys I'm going to have that were super close, and he was in that threesome. Really liked Ron Slay. He was a guy to me that, I get it, the NBA now is all just who's the superior athlete. They just want the best athletes in the world. This was 20 years ago or 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just thought, is there not a spot for this guy? Because he could score. He could play a little defense. He could rebound. He could do a little bit of everything. I really liked Ron Slay.
He could score inside, even though he wasn't, I don't know, 6'7", 6 maybe.
Right.
But he could get his points inside.
He played bigger than he was, which I looked at him like a poor man's Charles Barkley.
Yeah.
That's kind of and I just thought, is there not a spot for this guy on some roster? Because he could be your jack of all trades off the bench. And you do see, even though everybody wants athletes today, you do see some guys around the league that are still just kind of a widget. We have him on the end of the bench, we use him for this or that and the other. Never going to be a starter, but a guy who's good enough to be at that level and a guy who can help your team. And I just thought Ron Slay did so many different things well that he would be a guy that somebody should have taken a chance on.
Well, I'll say this. I do think in the current climate, he might at least get a foot in the door because you've got the G League and then you also have the 2-way contracts. My guess is there would be a coach that really liked his game that would say, let's see what we can develop. And I think he would have gotten a foot in the door here in the United States and be able to perhaps compete. And then once he got an opportunity for a November call-up or something, that would be a chance. But again, it would come down to being in that perfect place, playing for the perfect coach, for somebody who would appreciate all that he was capable and is capable of.
Did anybody play to the crowd better? He was just so good. If you want to get a crowd involved, Ron Slay.
Ron Slay was the guy to do it. Yeah, he's. This is a heck of a comparison. He's now nobody's on this level, but he's kind of the basketball version now of Sterling Hinton. He's got Hinton-esque energy.
Yes.
I'll put it that way. Especially put him on the SEC network. Man, blows the roof off that place. All right, so we've got everybody's down to the number 1.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn and we go back this way? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is that right? Is that where we went?
Well, he went to.
Let's just, you do number 1. You do number 1 first.
Okay. This was, I'll say a little preface, and that was one of my all-time favorite players in the NBA was Wes Unseld. And I just
Yes.
had an appreciation for the guy that was probably not going to be so Greyhound-esque that he plays on the wing, but he's also not tall enough that he should be the guy that's under the basket. But it didn't bother him at all. So while it's not a one-to-one, this guy he had the ability to shoot. If there was a three-point shot for him from the deep corner, watch out. He did get drafted, played just for like 5 minutes in the NBA, but it would be right in the Dale Ellis era, and that would be Howard Wood.
It's good by Wood.
Yes,
Yeah,
and I thought he was an outstanding rebounder. Loved the fact that he was good on the outlet pass because, again, for Wes Unseld, he would just draw it back behind his head and it was going to be at the other end. I mean, it was just there. But Howard Wood was a very Wes Unseld-like player to my eyes, and he was just one of my favorites. So Wood good was exactly something that drove that. I was blessed enough that the Tip-Off Club brought him to speak a few years ago. And so I was able to dig out my Stokely Athletic Center program that he was on the cover of, where they were playing the University of Florida.
And get that thing signed?
Got it signed,
that's terrific.
Got my picture with Howard right there with it. So.
I had forgotten that he was actually listed as a Converse All-American one year. So technically, if you go back through UT's list of All-Americans, and there's, some are Sporting News, some are whatever, but, you usually think AP, the coach's poll, but he was a Converse All-American, Howard Wood. I remember, this is growing up in Middlesboro, and I would have been a kid, that era. And one of my best friends was up there, John Engel, and his father. Well, they were huge Kentucky fans.
I know John Engel.
You know the dad, John
Engel, yes.
Yeah, I knew the kid, John Engel.
Okay.
But they, I remember they were Kaywood Ledford guys. Of course, they're Kentucky fans. And I remember them disliking the put-on affectation of "Good by Wood." So I will always remember Howard Wood for that reason of Howard Wood. But yeah, he was a tremendous player, and that's right in my ballpark. I'm surprised. Well, we'll get into the surprises here. You've got Brooks. You've got Howard Wood. I'll finish off that team. My favorite all time. Dale Ellis.
Yeah.
I've got to have Dale Ellis on there. People can't appreciate, we talk about these guys who did everything, who just could do it all. This guy had to play the post against Ralph Sampson in an NCAA tournament game and survived.
Right.
He could, and he wound up going to the NBA, and he's nothing. He's an outside gunner. He holds the 3-point record for years and years. And yet at Tennessee, Don had to have him playing inside at times. He had him shooting at times. He did a little bit of everything. Dale Ellis, again, I was a little too young for Ernie and Bernie. So Ellis was that first, wow. When you're a kid and you're looking at these guys like, wow. Yeah. Dale Ellis, I would still be, if I walked into a room with Dale Ellis today, I would still be starstruck. It would be, people who know why I'm a Patriots fan, it would be the equivalent of when we had Stanley Morgan on my television show years ago, and Bobby Scott had to come over, and he dapped the sweat off my forehead. It's like, you're nervous in front of your idol. Jerk. But anyway.
And Stanley, too.
Yeah. Bobby was the idol. Yeah, but that's the way I would feel around Dale Ellis. He was just, as a kid growing up, it's like, that's the guy. He was a tremendous basketball player. But to see him, I mean, that was 2 years in a row Tennessee had to go up against Ralph Sampson in the NCAA tournament. I think the first time they came within 3 points of beating him. Second time they hung with him, but they couldn't have him close. But both times to see the season end, having, you get that bad draw where you're playing basically the number one team in the country at the time, and playing against a guy who was a monster in that era. But to see Dale Ellis have to get in the post against Ralph Sampson, that tells you what kind of a player he was.
And he was a better pro than Ralph wound up being.
Yeah, that he was.
I got to Newson in October of 1983, which is about the time Don DeVoe was starting basketball practice of his first season without Dale Ellis. So I miss Dale, and I regret that. I wish I'd been here to see Dale.
Tremendous basketball player.
As nice as he can be, and it's just something that you can't help but appreciate. But yes, I mean, he's because you have, and if you're of a certain age, remember all of those different pictures or paintings Tennessee, big Tennessee moments that we would go to someone's house, and here in the den with the light shining on it is Tennessee scoring against Alabama in football, and here's Dale Ellis in the putback against Kentucky. So it's just one of those things. He's that kind of iconic performer, and it's a shame that he doesn't get the celebration, because it was so easy to say Ernie and Bernie show. But he was that kind of good. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that he is part of a three-way tie. Him, Steph Curry, and Craig Hodges all have the same number of NBA three-point shooting contest All-Star Weekend victories to their
Now there's
to
a
their
bit
credit.
of trivia for you.
Yeah, that's impressive. I wouldn't have thought of that one. I wonder, you look at Bernard King and you look at Ernie Grunfeld, they became famous because they were a duo. You had Tennessee, which had never been a national powerhouse in basketball. It never had the spotlight on it like it did with those two. And there were two of them. If you just had one of them, I think any one of them would have been about the same as Dale Ellis, and it wouldn't have gotten the national spotlight. But it was because those two played together, and it kind of lessens the spotlight on a Dale Ellis or a Tony White because, well, it was these two. And I get that. It's like there have been great Boston Celtics, but Bird McHale kind of, you've got other guys, Kobe and Shaq playing together. So those kinds of things will drown out and steal a little bit of the spotlight from teams that just had that one guy. But, boy, Dale Ellis was a tremendous, tremendous player. I already see your board, Mike, and I wondered if I thought he might wind up on all three of these because he was close to mine.
Shocked, I say, that he is not on either one of your lists, my number one guy. I don't know what's wrong with you all.
Well, with me, much. With him, it's just a fluke. Who you got?
Chris Lofton.
Yeah.
Again, I'm shocked he's not on your list. Seriously. But Chris, like Tony White, like Zakai Zeigler, unsung high school recruit. I mean, he wasn't unsung as a high school player, but as a college recruit. To come in here as almost an afterthought, a lucky get, a lucky addition to the class, and to have the career he had, his demeanor, I loved his demeanor. I loved his modesty, loved his respect for the game. And to me, seeing the shots he made from distance, to me, that was especially exciting. Like, to me, that I would rather see that than a Michael Jordan between his legs dunk. The shots Chris Lofton made, the best contested shooter I ever saw in my life.
That's what I was going to say. I don't know if he's the best shooter I've ever seen. He's the best contested shooter I've ever seen. Yeah. That guy hit more shots with a hand in his face than anyone I could ever remember wearing the orange. Dale Ellis was a great shooter. Michael Brooks was a great shooter. Chris Lofton could shoot with a hand in his face, falling backwards from 30 feet. He was remarkable.
And I think by about his junior year, he really developed where he could drive. I mean, he could drive and was elusive. I remember that they played Memphis here in Knoxville, I think his junior year. And I was just amazed that it wasn't just Chris Lofton standing in the corner hitting 30-footers. It was going down the lane and managing to get his shot off against those athletic Memphis guys. So just everything about him. And then you have the added story of the cancer that I certainly didn't know about his senior year. And I was honored to be part of that SEC story piece that's just come out about Chris. If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you do. So. Yeah,
just because you're in it, right?
and maybe he gets a little bonus point for being a Kentucky guy. I say that meaning I played high school basketball in Kentucky, not like he did, but I could appreciate what it meant to be a high school basketball legend, to lead your little team to the state tournament, to do what he had done.
Mayfield?
Mason County.
Mason County. Okay.
Yeah. So, Chris Lofton.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons he's not on this list, because I figured one of you two would put him on there, and I wanted to spread the wealth. To me, it would have been easy to put him on there, but I wanted to be sure I got Wayne Chisholm on there because I figured he wouldn't be listed by other folks. But Lofton, it's impossible not to have him somewhere in your favorite player list. Again, I'm always drawn to the story, and the fact that he was not the highest recruit. The fact there was fear, if you remember, when Buzz Peterson was whacked, there was fear that he was going to depart. And then you got Bruce Pearl in. It's like, oh, thank goodness Lofton stayed. And it's like, oh, yeah, in hindsight, thank goodness Lofton stayed. 'Cause it was the best for him and the best for Tennessee, certainly. But once again, the connection, there were a lot of people there where he was going through the cancer battle. He lost weight. And, in the media, we're not sitting there going, has he lost a few pounds? We just know something's wrong. And I remember on our show, we're like, and every show is like, what's up with Chris Lofton? Well, he was going through a hell of a battle there.
Yeah.
Which takes, and to do that at his age, that couldn't have been easy. So the fans really rallied around him. And, of course, he played at that revival, really, because it's funny that Ron Slay and our buddy Isaiah Victor, another Kentuckian who played at Tennessee, the guys on that era, it's like the Green years never existed because people didn't connect with Jerry Green. They just didn't connect with those teams. You had good teams there, but they were kind of overlooked. So that Bruce Pearl thing was kind of a real revival going all the way back. And there were people that were drawing past DeVoe all the way. It's Mears to Pearl. And Lofton was a huge part of that. Yes. So, I think for a lot of people, he's probably number one on their list.
My favorite Chris Lofton story in terms of a personal interaction, it's a media day for Tennessee football, and it's later in the season, so there's also an exhibition game that night, or it might have been a pre-conference, not a major opponent showdown for Tennessee. I think it was an exhibition game. But anyhow, I was one of the last stragglers of those that had been there with the group of media, and I just noticed that Chris is walking through that top level, the street level of the complex, so I can't help but think, we're both going to walk out the same door and then just go out towards Gibbs. So anyhow, I noticed that he's walking behind me, decide I'm just going to let him be. He's finishing drinking a bottle of water, and I just know that he had one, and as I'm walking past the garbage can, I hear rim rattle and drop to the floor. And he had finished his bottle of water, and he had tried to toss it into the garbage can, and at that point in time, I couldn't resist. I turned around and I said, "Did you miss?" And he started laughing because he was busy picking up the bottle, but he reaches down to pick up the bottle. He goes, "Yeah, don't tell anybody."
If you had had a hand in his face, he would have.
Yeah.
That's right. And there would have been a whistle and an and one.
Tell you what, let's each, I will point mine toward my camera there very quickly. My list, we'll just recap these and then we'll quickly throw out names who didn't make our list but should be remembered. My number one was Dale Ellis. Tony White was number 2. Michael Brooks was number 3. Zakai Zeigler, number 4. Allan Houston, 5. Wayne Chisholm was 6th. John, if you will put yours to number 3 there.
All right. And so what we have here, my number 1, Howard Wood. Number 2, Michael Brooks. Number 3, Ernie Grunfeld. Number 4, Bert Bertelkamp. 5, Steve Hamer. 6, Zakai Zeigler.
I love Howard Wood, number 1. That's awesome. And Mike, let's go ahead and show your final, where you have added 2 more.
I got Chris Lofton, number 1, Ron Slay, number 2, Allan Houston, 3, Tony White, 4, Zakai Zeigler, 5, and the peanut butter and jelly combo of William Schofield, number 6.
There you go.
I like Mike's 6 against our 2 6s.
Probably,
if they were going to square off.
Yeah. I had Ron Slay on my almost list. I had Chris Lofton on my almost list. I had 2 guys that I came to know. One who was just glue guy. Dane Bradshaw was very close. Everybody loved Dane Bradshaw. And then when Dane came to do the Sports Source, straight off, he stopped playing. He started doing TV with us, and I know he started doing radio with you guys. I remember telling people at the time, of course he is probably 40 now, but at the time he's 22, 23 years old. I remember people would ask, what's Dane Bradshaw like? He's like a 40-year-old man. He's the most mature, great ambassador for this school. And I remember that, and I'm sure he did this with you guys too, just what kind of a person he is. When he got the job with the SEC Network, he sent me a note, said, thanks for whatever, you trained me to do this and all this. And he wrote me a handwritten, I go out and I get a handwritten letter. Peyton Manning's the only guy that does handwritten letters. I get one from Dane Bradshaw, and of course it was nonsense. I didn't help him do anything. He was, the minute he sat down on my set for the TV show, I thought, it won't be long. He'll be gone somewhere bigger. It had nothing to do with any training. But that's just the kind of person he was. And it was great to find someone who everyone loved this kid because he seemed like a great guy. And then you get to know him. It's like, wow, his parents really did some good raising because he really is a good guy. Bradshaw was on there. Isaiah Victor, who we got to know through I got to know through the television show, really good guy. But the guy I wanted to mention that I didn't find a way to get him in there, Dyron Nix.
Oh, yes.
Dyron Nix was a guy that I
late
enjoyed
Dyron
playing.
Nix,
Yeah, the
of
late
course.
Dyron Nix. Yeah, I enjoyed watching him play when I was a kid as well. The back in the days of the Jerry curl.
Yep.
Dyron Nix.
Led the SEC in scoring one year, led the SEC in rebounding another year. Loved his game, and he was one that I was mystified that there wasn't a spot for him in the NBA. I think it was the Pacers that he got an opportunity with, and it's just, he was also one of my all-time faves for just the way he was such a smooth operator.
Florida kid, I believe. Was he DeLand?
Panhandle, Fort Walton.
Okay, Fort Walton Beach. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, okay. John, who else did you have that didn't quite make the list?
Yeah, Dane Bradshaw was right there, and he was gracious enough to join us several times on Sports Talk, just as he did with your show. And it's funny, too, because one of the pictures that I still have on this phone that actually came and survived a flip phone is where it happened. But anyhow, we've got a listener named Mike in Oak Ridge, and he was such a fan of Dane Bradshaw, he named his son Dane.
Wow.
And so he and his wife bring baby Dane, by the studio, and so have a picture of Dane holding baby Dane on his lap. And it's one of the coolest things ever. And Dane's now, I think he's a junior, maybe a senior at Oak Ridge.
You would think.
Yeah, but
time-wise.
anyhow, it's just really cool.
That's another thing that I liked about it. It reminded me of one more thing I liked about Dane Bradshaw very much. Extremely self-deprecating. I love anybody that's self-deprecating.
Yes.
And he is so, I remember he came out, Vertical Leap was the book.
Yeah.
And he made some jokes about that. He made some jokes about him making the all-century team. He was on our show, and anytime you'd give him a compliment, it would always be kind of a, oh, shucks, joke at his own expense. Just good people. All right.
Very much so.
Who else you got?
And it's just guys that have been as fun to cross paths with after their time at Tennessee. Mike Jackson, if he is at Tennessee and there's not Ernie and Bernie, then it's amazing to think what his talents would have resulted in terms of his numbers, and yet he was still awfully good. I mean, so
If you're on Facebook, if you're a friend with, nobody is flying the Tennessee flag on Facebook better than Mike Jackson.
Sure enough.
To this day.
And I think it's wonderful that he just celebrates all things orange, but he was also one of my favorites in that period of time. Aaron Green is one of my all-time favorite people, along with being a big favorite. Kirk Naylor, I did a radio show with. It was after Sports Talk that we would do a 30-minute kind of like basketball preview, and Kirk Naylor was my co-host. And I liked him as a player, liked him even more as we talked basketball on the air and then also talking basketball off the air.
Now, who did you say right before Kirk Naylor?
Aaron Green.
Aaron Green, I was going to say, and that guy should get a battlefield commission for playing for O'Neal.
Hee-haw, that's what O'Neal called him.
O'Neal was rough on everybody, but he was particularly rough on Aaron Green, and Aaron Green took every bit of it and didn't back down from it. Kudos to him.
Yeah.
And then Steve Ray from the Don DeVoe era, just so tough as nails. And but Steve Ray would be another one. So I could go on and on, but I thought I'll just leave the podium for someone else now.
It's a good, and from that era, I almost threw in Tyrone Beeman. I said that name earlier. I said Steve Ray and Tyrone Beeman as guys that you wouldn't think of being the greatest players ever. You know, they're not going to be on the top 10, hang their jersey in a rafter thing. But those are guys that I remember. It's about when you're a kid, you know.
Exactly.
Part of that. I'll give you another guy, that Reggie Johnson.
Yes.
From that era was a really, really good basketball player who was overshadowed by some other guys. Mike Strange, who did you leave? Who did you have to leave off?
Well, these are guys I covered, and Dane Bradshaw is right there. I don't know if a more beloved player at any college anywhere that averaged 4.8 points, his career scoring average, is more beloved than Dane Bradshaw. I got to know Dane's parents. And they were so nice. I'll never forget this. Like for their last senior day home game that morning, I would have a kind of a profile of the guy, and wrote about a lot of the things we've said about Dane. And I remember his dad, Mike, told me, he said, I sat in the car outside Thompson Bowling reading that article, and it made me cry. He was so proud of Dane. So
that's good.
Another guy I covered, Josh Richardson.
He
was
a good one.
Conzo Martin's first recruit, I believe. And him, because he went from, as a freshman, 2.9 points a game, as a senior, 16 points a game. Just blossomed and played great defense, went on to have a great career, and he was just Another guy from a great set of parents. His parents went to every game. We'd see him in the airport in Gainesville or wherever after the game. So just a guy who did it right and was rewarded with, as far as I know, still playing in the NBA
Yes,
all these years later.
And he was not going to let Donnie Tyndall's team finish under 500.
Right.
Yeah.
Loved the fact that he was one of those guys that it was a not on my watch kind of thing. And anytime Tennessee had a chance to win, he was going to make sure they did.
Yeah. And we mentioned Steve Hamer. He was on my almost list too. And a guy, Brandon Wharton. I think Brandon Wharton is so he's appreciated, but I don't think he's appreciated to the extent he should be based on his career.
You don't hear his name.
He's a number 11 all-time scorer. He was a 40% three-point shooter. He just averaged double
I didn't realize
figures.
he was the number 11 all-time scorer.
Yeah, 1,651 points. So just a solid guy that, he was 2 years of Kevin O'Neal, then 2 years of Jerry Green. He took a lot of O'Neal abuse too.
Someday I've got a tape. Someday I'm going to air that tape on this. On the Sports Source Digital. I've got a halftime tape. I can't do it because it was given to me by someone who, well, they're gone too, but they gave me a tape that was taken inside of a Kevin O'Neal halftime speech. Did I ever show you that thing?
No.
Okay.
If you have, I forgot.
Wow. It's in terms of, if people wanted to know what we mean by they take abuse from Kevin O'Neal, this halftime tape, you've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
It's unreal. Now, it's amusing if you're on the outside looking at it. If you'd been in there sitting there, I don't know how they didn't kill the guy. But, yeah, any of those guys who played under O'Neal deserve a lot of credit. Yeah.
Two more real quick mentions. Two more. John Higgins, the guard, who was a great three-point shooter who didn't shoot much. He played more minutes than anybody that's not in the 1,000-point scoring club because I think he came up to about 900 points, but just so unselfish, but just such a nice contributor and is a good high school coach here in the area. Yep. And finally, Kevin Punter. A JUCO guy came in, he played 1 year, Donnie Tyndall brought him in. He stuck around, and Rick Barnes to this day will tell you Kevin Punter was so instrumental in helping him establishing the culture.
Lay the foundation.
He led the SEC scoring that year on a team that wasn't very good, was just a really good, solid guy. So that's
good list.
One that's bubbled to the surface, I would love to mention, Fred Jenkins.
Yes.
Just an incredible individual, always a smile on his face. It was a big deal that he was coming, from Columbia, Tennessee. They had a parade when he signed, and so, but saw him afterward, and he was working for FedEx, and he looked like he could still play. But he was always happy to talk about playing and Tennessee hoops. Fred Jenkins, yes.
They should have made it FredEx. I'll just say one other name that popped up, and that's the point of this. It's throwing out the names you haven't thought of in a while, and one jogs the memory of another one. I bet you can guess the name if I say there's not a betterman than Dan Fetterman. All right, we'll end it with that. And one last one, Doug Roth. Doug Roth, who took some Don DeVoe abuse in his day. Yeah. But Doug Roth.
Can't repeat on the air.
Yeah, exactly. Mike Strange, thanks for doing this again.
It was fun. We got I got a lot of the Pearl era, and you guys are the older. We're here. Yeah, so it worked out well.
Yeah. John, thank you, as always.
Always remember Doug Roth and his salute to LSU.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Dane Bradshaw had a salute at Auburn, a very similar salute one day.
I wonder if we should, and just for the fact that I should have had him on here, but he was so mean to poor little Shaquille O'Neal. Dale Brown had to come out and defend him against Carlos Groves.
Carlos Groves.
So, all right, gentlemen.
Because that was 6'7".
Oh,
what
I know.
was Shaquille O'Neal going to do against a young man who was 6'7"?
It was so bad. Thank goodness for Dale Brown being there to break it up. Thanks to you guys. Hey, if you like this kind of content, do me a favor. Hit the like button, hit the thumbs up. That tells other Tennessee fans about programming like this, and you can subscribe to this channel, and that way it'll just notify you when we put up any kind of shows, whether it's Give Him Six or Wild, which is an outdoor show, Hardball, which is a baseball show with 3 VFLs over there. All kinds of content here for you, all brought to you by Hearthside Bank. See you next time on Give Him Six.